It's 1347 in Florence, Italy. The Black Plague continues to rage across the city. The following story attempts to illuminate what it might have been like to live through that, and the kind of person you might become as a result. Let's get into it. There weren't many people in church today, Giovanni said to his wife Marinella, as they stepped through the muddy road on their way home in the late afternoon. Off to their right, two pigs rolled in the mud, tearing old clothes apart with their teeth. We still need to go, Marinella answered, and for as long as we can. Someone has to show God we don't deserve his wrath. My head hurts, Giovanni complained, placing the palm of his hand against his forehead. Marinella bit her lip and sent a silent prayer to heaven that it was only a headache. This sudden illness that had struck their city had already taken her sister and some of their neighbors, and that only included people they knew personally. Countless souls from their church had stopped showing up, leaving Giovanni and Marinella to assume the worst. Marinella glanced over her shoulder as her 4-year-old daughter, Gabriella, stamped through the filth, getting the hem of her best dress dirty. Stop it, Marinella scolded her child. God's watching, Marinella added, pointing at the sky. Jason, Gabriella let her chin fall to her chest, ran a few steps to catch up with her parents, and slipped her hand into her mother's. Marinella squeezed her daughter's hand and smiled down at her indulgently, then shielded Gabriella's eyes. When they passed by, a group of homeless men passed out on the side of the road. Marinella prayed again. Please keep my daughter safe. Don't let her get sick. A half hour later, the family arrived at their home on the outskirts of Florence's city center. And Giovanni complained again. Marinella, my headache. I have to go lay down. Marinella placed a hand on his shoulder and gave him a concerned look before she answered. As you will. I'll bring you some porridge. Giovanni ambled off to bed, while Marinella and Gabriella went to the kitchen area to make porridge. Let's use milk, not water, Gabriella said as her mother picked up the water pitcher. You know we don't have any milk right now. Here, my special girl, go bring this to your father, she said, using a short wooden spoon to stir the bland-colored meal before handing it to Gabriella. Gabriella carefully took the bowl from her mother and tiptoed over to her father, as if being on her toes would prevent her from spilling. Her father reclined on a mat of straw, the only thing separating him from the floor. Giovanni didn't stir as Gabriella set the bowl down next to him, so she placed her head on his chest and breathed in his scent of smoke, sweat, and vinegar, a smell that, while objectively distasteful, comforted Gabriella. A few hours later, the sun set completely. In the total dark, Marinella and Gabriella, now out of their church clothes, prepared for bed. You sleep with your father. I'm going to sleep on the chair tonight, Marinella said as she kissed Gabriella on the forehead and examined Giovanni on the opposite side of the bed. She knew Giovanni always slept better when he had more space to move around, and she needed him to get over that headache and go into work the next day. They desperately needed food and money. The next morning, as the roosters crowed and the sun shined through the windows, Marinella and Gabriella stretched and rose from their slumber. But Giovanni did not. Marinella approached Giovanni and knelt down beside him. She shoved his shoulder, but he didn't move. Giovanni, wake up. We need you to work. When he still didn't move, she turned to her daughter. Stay here. Stay in the kitchen. Your father's very sick. I'm going to get the priest. Stay in the kitchen, she repeated, staring meaningfully into Gabriella's eyes. Marinella sprinted toward the city center in search of a priest, thinking that maybe she couldn't save her husband's body, but she could save his soul. Out of breath, she reached the majestic Duomo, a huge white building with intricate statues carved into the entrance and sides of the building, and a large brick dome on top. She found a priest and grabbed his arm. "You need to hear my husband's final confession," she yelled at him. He pulled his arm out of hers and practically spat. "Get off me!" She grabbed for him again, and he pushed her away hard, and she saw not anger, but fear in his eyes. Marinella let him go and backed away. She turned around and headed off to search for another priest, heading down the same road the family had used the day before. As she slowed to a walk, the smell of rot invaded her nose like enemy ships. She placed her hand over her mouth and stumbled. The men she saw yesterday were still there, but they weren't homeless beggars. They were dead men. Same with the pigs that were fighting over the old clothes. No one was taking away the bodies. Marinella bent over, her hands on her knees. She vomited in the street from the smell. When she stood up, she spotted a friend a block down the street and raced towards her. As she drew nearer, she saw her friend's fingers were black all the way down to the knuckles. Then she noticed her friend carried a loaf of bread under one arm, and something took over Marinella. She thought about how her husband wouldn't go to work that day, or any other day, and how whenever people had finger discoloration like that, they never survived. "Please forgive me, God," she prayed and lunged forward, stole the bread from her friend, and ran back to her house. Inside, she found Gabriella laying on top of her father. "I told you to stay in the kitchen," Marinella said in a choked voice. "You took a long time," Gabriella whined. Marinella took a deep breath. "Help me get your father outside. Then we'll eat this bread I got, okay?" Marinella dragged her husband painstakingly towards the door, while Gabriella just held his hand and walked with them. Once outside, in the clear, mid-morning light, one wouldn't know there was the worst plague the world had ever seen raging all around them. Marinella turned to face her daughter. A large bump protruded from Gabriella's neck. Without a word, Marinella backed up into their home and gently closed the door. She placed her back against the wall and slid down until she was sitting. Then she cried as Gabriella knocked on the door. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy historical fiction, maybe check out the playlist on the screen now, where we go back to ancient Rome.